Good evening. My name is Tom Franks, and I'll be moderating this session of the Brattleboro Energy Committee 2019 Energy Policy and Legislation Forum. The goal is a frank, open, and informed dialogue among Brattleboro legislators and constituents about energy-related legislative outlook and priorities for 2019. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the Energy Committee, and I'm a longtime member of the Representative Town Meeting. The new biennium will be starting in the coming year, and we have some bills from the last biennium just sort of as fodder for our discussion as what might be some important issues related to energy. We have a full agenda today, and I'd like to propose a few ground rules. First, that people wait to be acknowledged before speaking, and also be sure to get to a microphone because we are recording this. If you have comments, in general, please limit them to 2 minutes, and if you would be so kind as to allow others to complete their statements before you wish to speak, that'd be great. And finally, it'd be good if we could all refrain from speaking a second time on an issue until everyone has had a chance. So first off, we'll start with a brief report from Ralph Mima on the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network Conference that happened recently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you all for coming. And thank you particularly to the legislators for such a... I have to stay tethered. Okay, all right.
You could use the other microphone if you want.
That's okay. I'll just stay right here. So anyway, thank you very much to the legislators for making this a priority.
Because I forgot to allow them to introduce themselves. I just assume everybody knows them, so please.
Good point.
I'm Jeanette White. I represent Windham County in the Senate.
Representative Molly Burke, representing part of Brattleboro.
Becca Ballot, represent Windham County in the Senate.
Emily Kornheiser, representative-elect from part of Brattleboro.
Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. And as Tom alluded to, this was conceived as an opportunity for Brattleboro constituents in particular to talk to our town district reps in the State House and the 2 Windham County senators. So we really appreciate your prioritizing this. I wanted to do a couple of different things in this hopefully brief interval before we kick into the nitty-gritty of legislation, and that is, first of all, mention that 2 weeks ago, roughly, on December 1st, was the VCAM Conference. VCAM is the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network, and they have an annual conference. It's been going on for, I would say, probably 7 or 8 years at least. And it's basically the coming together of all of the local grassroots energy committee and other local activists from around the state. Not every town has an energy committee. In some cases, the energy people are part of a conservation commission or a planning commission or something like that. But it was the grassroots energy folks who have collectively over time had a huge impact on how Vermont deals with energy and with climate issues and resilience and related topics. And it's a really excellent conference. I recommend it to anyone who hasn't been before. What I wanted to relay back from it is that many different aspects of energy were covered, and on top of that we had Bill McKibben as the first of 2 keynote speakers, who is very big picture and very global and has been just about everywhere recently and can give us a report back from Greenland and all sorts of other places. His message was quite somber and could be seen as a warm-up, if you could use that word, for the COP24 climate talks in Katowice in Poland, which he was very much focused on. And so there was a kind of a general sense in the meeting, I think, depending on, regardless of which piece of the VCAM conference agenda people were participating in, heating, transportation, solar, and so forth, that there was an awful lot that needed to happen in a short period of time, and that I think a lot of people, I was sort of consciously asking people what they were going to take away from the conference, because I knew I had to prepare for this, and I made notes that a number of people said that they felt sort of stuck because they feel like we just don't have the public policy tools or the public policy programs in place right now to make change happen fast enough in the right direction. And some people were feeling pessimistic, other people were feeling kind of excited in a frightened way to think that the pendulum might be swinging back toward a greater focus on energy and climate action than there has been perhaps for the last few years anyway. There was a lot of reference to the fact that right now there's a divide between the majorities in the legislature and the governor's office in terms of how much priority to place on energy action and so forth. I just mentioned a couple of other quick things. If anyone wants to see it, I do have the program, which you can take a look at afterwards. Our own Becca Ballot was one of the speakers actually in a workshop having to do with the 2019 legislative look forward. So that indicates that there's a nice tie-in, I think, between what you discussed there and I think some of the things we'd like to talk about tonight. There are multiple threads going through this, and it's very hard to summarize all of them, but a lot of things having to do with biomass and heat pumps and EVs and solar and wind and so forth were part of the program, along with some sort of tools for activists, grassroots organizing workshops really to help energy committees be more effective and to learn from each other. I've got a cold that I'm still trying to fight my way away from. I want to get into some of the statistics that were emphasized in just a moment, but I will say that just an observation. Last week, I went to a meeting of the Heartland Energy Committee that was looking at the potential for storage and for community solar in that area. And I will mention that in the Upper Valley, there seems to be a lot of communication going on between energy committees in that area. They seem to be very connected to each other in a way that maybe we aren't as much with the villages surrounding Brattleboro. And of course, they were all at the VCAM Conference, but then just a week later, they were working together or meeting together and having people come in from GMP to speak. And there were people from the Heartland, Norwich, Stratford, Woodstock, Sustainable Woodstock, a lot of other local energy committees in that area. And so that was just sort of a microcosm of what happens at VCAM. What I'll finish with is that at the VCAM conference, there's a lot of mention of this report that was done last year by EAN, the Energy Action Network, called Getting to 90% Renewable by 2050. And it's full of useful information. There's some incredible graphics in here about where we are across the energy spectrum and a proposal for where we need to go. And I have a handout which I'm going to pass. Divide this accurately. If you would like to grab a copy, and then any remaining copies I'll just spread through the audience. I put together some things that were part of the logical sequence of key pieces of information and insights that I think about a lot because of the work I do, but I also heard loud and clear in the sessions that I went to at the meeting. There is this 90% renewable energy goal by 2050 for Vermont in the Comprehensive Energy Plan. If you include Canadian hydroelectric power, we're currently at about 20% renewable. Roughly, that's where we are as a state, 20% renewable. I'm not talking about electricity, but about energy in total. Business, and one of the things that comes out clearly in this report based on recent data is that business as usual, in other words, just doing things the way we're doing them right now, will not get us to 90% by 2050. It will not get us to 25% by 2025. Currently, the transportation sector is only about 5% renewable. And I guess that's probably EVs that are charged using solar power or something like that. Thermal, which is building heating basically, but also cooling, is only 20% renewable. And as recent data has shown, greenhouse gas emissions from Vermont continue to rise. Electrical, Vermont it's probably a little bit higher, but according to this report and what they said at the conference, Vermont is at about 43% renewable electricity, including hydro. Solar and wind account for about 12%, and then the other, what would that be, 31% is hydro, mostly. There's some biomass. Vermont imports 60% of its electricity from Quebec and the rest of New England, so we're only 40% self-sufficient in energy. Solar has grown most, going back 8 or 10 years. It's currently at about 4% of the total electric supply, and EAN suggests that it should be at 10% by 2050 and 10% by 2025 and 24% by 2050. In other words, solar has grown very rapidly from an extremely low level and offers a lot of further or future growth prospects. And then I'm just going to talk about a couple of specific things within this. So distributed generation, which is generation of energy broadly by smaller entities scattered across the grid as opposed to from a small number of large generating stations. So under distributed generation, at the moment, net metered solar is the main program. You do have wind, a few large wind installations, and you have some other hydropower and biomass plants that predate net metering. But at the moment, particularly for solar, net metering is the sort of the biggest show in town. It accounts for a large part of recent solar capacity growth in Vermont. There are other programs that are also causing some solar growth, including the Standard Offer Program, individual power purchase agreements with utilities, and then the SPEED program, which is ending, but was a cause of distributed generation growth in the past. Distributed generation is an agreed upon goal, and there continues to be broad support for it, including from the leaders of the utilities. There are major policy challenges in all of this. How do we transform transportation and thermal energy? How do we sustain growth in renewables? And one thing I want to point out, and here I'm using the opportunity at the microphone to mention something dearest to my heart, there has been a fall off in recent years in the growth rate of solar capacity in Vermont. And I just heard on the radio that that nationally in the United States from mid-2017 to mid-2018, the growth in solar capacity fell off 15%. The growth rate fell off 15%. I found a mention in this report that between 2016 and 2017, new installed solar capacity in Vermont decreased by 30%. And I'm going to mention this. There's a consulting firm named Synapse, which Vermont, or Renewable Energy Vermont, REV, hired to do a report on net metering earlier this year. And they found that the annual net metered solar capacity being added each year has been actually declining since 2017. And I'll just refer to this on the back side. I won't go into detail, but in the back side, or on the back side of this handout, is the clip from page 7 of their report, which you can find online. And you can see there's a growth curve that rises rather steeply in the beginning from 2009 all the way to 2015. But then it starts to fall off, and this is not the healthy growth curve of a new industry that our future is going to be based upon. It's the curve of something that sort of has its moment in history and then starts to decline.
Could I ask you to wrap up?
Yep. So as a challenge to the legislators and to the conversation here, I would assert, and I think there was ample evidence for it at the VCAM Conference, that policy surgery is needed. We've passed a number of energy bills in the past that haven't necessarily generated the desired change. So I'm not going to mention these things, but I've summarized some factors, some policy debates, and some thoughts, which maybe I'll bring up in the discussion about ways to address this.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
And unless the legislators would like to speak right now, any thoughts on this? Or should we go forward?
I certainly have questions, but I'm wondering how you want the flow of the,
I'm open to the flow, whatever you like.
can I ask Ralph
I
a
think that might
question?
be a good,
So Ralph, in looking at this chart that you gave us, and you're saying that this is not the sign of a healthy industry, it appears to be one in decline and not on the rise. What are the legislative fixes, if there are any, to help sustain this industry that we have not already tried? What are you thinking about? Because I see this evening as really an opportunity for us too to get some ideas around language that can be useful to the goals that we're all trying to meet here. So I'm wondering, as you think about how to make this healthier over the next 5 to 10 years, what would it take to do that?
Well, my answer assumes that a lot of the energy puzzle is going to be addressed through further electrification, and that that electricity, should come from a healthy mix of out-of-state and in-state sources. And so, based on those assumptions, we would want to grow in-state renewable energy generation from multiple sources, and the program that has been able to most successfully leverage private capital and grow generation capacity quickly is the net metering program. There are other programs, and I don't want to be just like net metering, but net metering has shown that that's possible. And I think that in the Synapse report, and also we could discuss it in greater detail outside of this forum, but I think that net metering started off with pretty much explosive growth, and then a number of things have been done to slow down that growth, and that there's an opportunity coming around in 2020, or from 2019 to 2020, for the legislature to revisit the net metering program as it's currently being implemented by the Public Utilities Commission, and look at what the barriers and potential new growth opportunities are, and really give that an extensive and rigorous public airing. Because right now a lot of what goes on with net metering is sort of down deep in the boiler room, where only PUC people and Department of Public Service and developer lawyers go. But there are the devil's in the details there. But the details, I think, there's an opportunity to adjust many of them to develop more sort of robust, sustainable long-term growth.
do any of the other legislators have anything they'd like to ask or raise at this point?
Not at this point.
Thank you. Oscar, would you care to take the mic for a moment?
Hi, everyone.
Introduce yourself, please.
My name's Oscar. I'm the current chair of the Energy Committee. Thanks all for coming. So I have prepared a partial summary of bills that were not passed in the previous legislative session. It sounds like there are some missing, some House bills you want to bring up. Maybe we can do that at the end after I've gone through my summary. So these things are complicated and hard to understand. I'm sure there are parts here where I have the details wrong. There are also written into the document some questions, some things that we talked over and didn't have the answers to. So as I go through with a quick summary, feel free to jump in anytime if there's something to correct or if you have the answer to one of the questions. So the first one, JRH 17, was a resolution opposing the EPA rollback for emissions standards. And again, these are all bills that didn't get passed. So particularly if there's some reason, if they weren't serious bills to begin with or they fell apart for a particular reason, that could be really useful context. So I think every time I summarize one, I'll look meaningfully over at you guys. And if anyone wants to jump in, you can. If not, I'll move on.
Did a joint resolution, we didn't even take it up. It would have been treated as a bill.
Exactly.
Because it has policy implications, and there is a feeling in the Senate that resolutions often, they don't have clout, they don't really do
Sure.
much, so, except for those resolutions that are congratulatory and that kind of thing. we oftentimes don't spend a lot of time on them. So I can't speak to this one in particular, but that is a kind of a general feeling.
I think there's a little bit of a difference in the House
Mhm.
around issues.
You might want to speak into the microphone, Molly.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's a little bit of a difference regarding that in the House. I don't think it came to the House, I mean, I don't think anyone in the House sponsored it, obviously, but I think there's I think that we.
Yeah, 20 representatives.
Oh.
It's a joint, so it
Oh,
would
it was
have been.
joint. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway,
Yeah.
somehow it never got made out of the committee.
Okay.
So, but I think in general, maybe we look a little bit more favorably on resolutions around policy.
Okay, great, thank you. So S21, the act was to establish a study, but the general concept was requiring new large commercial buildings to install solar generation. I found one article that had a favorable quote from Walmart saying they wouldn't be opposed, but not much else. Did this end up leading anywhere?
My guess is that because it was a study, it was going to cost money, and the Appropriations Committee put the kibosh on a lot of studies because we just didn't have the money. That would be a guess. I don't know.
I don't even know if it made it off the wall in committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Neither of us are on the Natural Resources Committee, which is where all of these bills
Right.
would have gone.
Right.
Or
But
most of them.
because it wasn't one of the ones I was directing traffic on as the majority leader, my guess is it never made it off the wall from the
Gotcha.
Senate committee. Which doesn't mean it won't be reintroduced.
Right.
Yeah, particularly if
Right.
any of these sound
Yes.
similar to something that you know is coming back around. Okay, so S51, this one was confusing to me, but basically it seemed like it was officially writing into law 90 by 50, which I guess was not officially law before, which,
That's right. And without throwing anyone under the bus, I believe that the committee should have moved on this much more quickly early in the session. And we had the support on the committee early on, and the longer that it stayed in committee and took testimony, it got bogged down. So there was initial support among the committee, and I think it was, in my conversations with the chair since then, I think he wished he had made a different decision about how much testimony to take on it early on.
Okay.
So, in keeping with what Jeanette said, neither of us serve on the Energy Committee, but I actually have put in a request to be transferred to that committee.
Oh.
So I'm hoping that that will come to pass, but there are a lot of things in the works. But it is my hope to be there.
that would be great. Okay, so S66 would establish, looked like a pretty wide-ranging cap and trade program. And last action was 2017. And this seemed like a pretty, weighty bill. And yeah, I was curious about this one and a couple others in particular, if this just sort of was proposed and then never got any momentum. I know it's, yeah.
Did you have a companion bill on the House side?
Yeah, I can answer a little bit. There was
Great.
a companion bill in the House, and there were a couple of other bills that I had introduced. One was exactly like this. There was another one about doing a study about cap and trade or other forms of carbon pricing. And that bill got taken up, it became a committee bill, and it got absorbed into the appropriations bill, and that was, an appropriation was put in for $120,000 for a study of different forms of carbon pricing and how they might affect the Vermont economy. And that study is coming to us on January 15th.
Oh, great.
So sometimes when you see that something didn't really move, it moved in a different way. And particularly, it's hard to track when it gets sort of absorbed into another bigger bill.
Yeah, so the start of my research on a lot of this was looking at bills
Yeah.
in that specific committee, so I'm sure there's stuff like that I've missed.
And one of the other points is that if there was a companion bill in the House, there might have been an agreement for the House to take that one up, and the Senate just wouldn't do it at all, because you don't want two bills traveling in different directions, the same bill kind of crossing in the night, so.
Okay. Okay, S-153. It's basically just seemed like
What
a,
is it?
You take it.
Go for it.
I would not pay any attention to 153
Okay.
or 252 at all.
I see a theme. Okay.
What did they say?
S-153 was a proposed big cut to the energy transformation obligations for utilities,
Oh.
like a drastic,
Yeah.
down to 2/3%. And then 252 was, oh yeah, this was give more deference to
Right.
regional plans. Okay,
Yes,
good. So you were cutting down this document.
yeah.
So S-230, yes, this is another one I would like some more context on.
I have no idea.
Okay. So this one was changing the allocation of the energy efficiency charge, reallocating it along customer classes.
Like low income.
Yeah, I think so.
Actually, if I,
Well,
if I
Yeah.
may,
Oh, do you?
after you.
Well, I know that there's also customer classes for energy use according to the volume of use. So say the ski mountains or other large electrical users would be considered a different customer class and have a completely different relationship with utilities.
I have
Okay.
no idea.
In my read of that bill, the intent of it, as I understood it, was a sort of a one-year look back towards equity. In other words, whatever contribution a specific class made toward the energy efficiency charge, the next year, that class would have
Would
those
receive the
funds
rebate.
available.
Okay.
I
Regardless of
saw
ability
problems.
to pay.
I saw problems with that because one of the issues often with energy efficiency or renewable energy funding is a smooth flow of revenue, and that
Right.
would make it pretty choppy between, and if you have, say, a very large consumer in the industrial come in and do a whopping big project
Yeah.
one year, you might have to say no to them,
Mhm.
because the previous year, there was not a lot of revenue from that class, so it did not look to me, and I did a
Mhm.
quick read, I'm not legislatively trained on it.
And there's, I mean, in that instance too, with S-230, there isn't another member of the Energy Committee co-sponsoring that bill. So my
Is that
guess.
usually a good sign that
It's
not-
not always, but in this case, I think that this might be another one that never made it off the wall. I don't remember that discussion
Didn't even-
happening.
And some of these actually might have gone to finance.
That's true.
Instead of, because
Good point,
anything
Jeanette.
that deals with the utilities would go to finance instead of natural resources.
Okay.
Yes.
So I don't know how,
Yeah, no, it's a good
how
point.
this would have been assigned. I'm
Okay.
not sure at all.
All right, so I'm gonna try not take too much longer, but
Mhm.
S-259, this looked like it would, okay, well, so it would cut the net metering cap to 150 kilowatts, but then carve out this new zone up to 5 megawatts for community energy plants. So it seems like this could have a couple different effects, and I wasn't sure what the intent was. Was it to make it easier to establish these kinds of plants, or?
That would be my guess, knowing the chair, I'm sure that was at least part of the intent there, to make it easier. But for some of these bills, I'm happy to, follow up with you afterwards to find out, one, from the chair. So Chris Bray has been the chair of Natural Resources. We assume he will be the chair, but until January 9th, we don't know exactly who will be there. But I'm certainly happy to follow up with him about
Okay.
whether he plans to reintroduce this, since he was the lead sponsor on it.
That would be great. You don't have to go out of your way on all
Yeah.
of these because it's more just a conversation starter. But okay, so S-270 requires the preparation of a fiscal note on basically any bill that would affect carbon emissions.
That
And
came to GovOps. We had that in there.
that came to, what'd you say?
Government operations.
Okay.
To require a fiscal note. Oh, wait a minute. That was a fiscal note on, it was on a contract, so it was a similar bill, but it wasn't, it's very complicated to, if you're asking for a fiscal note on any bill that has any impact, it would impact our joint fiscal office tremendously, and we've resisted asking for joint fiscal notes on bills unless we have a sense that they're gonna have a huge impact, because you don't want them on
Just
all.
administrative overhead
Yeah,
taken
well,
up kind
yeah,
of thing?
we have a joint fiscal committee that does all of that work for
Okay.
us, and if we, I mean, we have over 1,000 bills introduced in a
Sure,
year,
yeah.
and so,
I mean, that was one of our concerns.
yeah.
So I think though, in having talked to the chair about sort of the broader concept of what are the total costs of energy? And so we have so many hidden costs that aren't factored in. I know that this is something he's gonna take another stab at in another form.
Yeah.
I think it will be a different bill, but he's really trying to look at true costs
Yeah.
of energy, both environmentally, societally, and how do we get that information we need, whether it's from joint fiscal or some, some other entity within government, that we're not currently doing that.
That makes sense.
So.
Okay, S271, an act relating to electric vehicles. Yeah, it looks like it would just designed to subsidize the cost of electrics and plug-in hybrids.
And I'm sure that was just a appropriation issue. Sometimes when the appropriation is going to be too large, they get the signal to the committee of jurisdiction that you can move it out, but
Okay.
we don't have the money to fund this.
Okay. So S284 was a carbon charge. This, I think, is the revenue neutral, or not, sorry, like, I don't know how to say that, but this was with the carbon charge refunded back on the electric bills to
Right.
consumers.
There was a House version of that, too.
There was?
Yeah, a lot of people signed it, actually.
I assume that the governor plans to veto.
Well,
If
see,
it ever came
this
to
is
that.
one of the things that this study is going to look at, is the Essex plan.
Oh,
Because,
great.
the implications are huge, and so that, something like this wasn't actually going to pass without, deep investigation. But to just get it out there was really important.
Okay.
And there were a lot of advocates who were working on this.
So that study would look at cap and trade and hypothetical carbon tax,
Yeah,
stuff like
cap
that?
and
Okay.
trade, various forms of carbon, including the Essex tax, the Essex plan. So, what's going to be the most advantageous, what's going to work best for Vermont, what is the impact on the economy, what's the impact on low-income people, because that's a big concern. So, we will know that more.
Okay. Yeah, January, that's soon.
Yeah.
Okay, so S288 seemed pretty straightforward. Third would require utilities to basically provide customer energy data at the customer's request to third parties, but looks for pretty benevolent purposes of letting that customer have better access to information and advice about energy efficiency. Have you heard anything about this one getting, okay? Not a lot of sponsors, which I don't know how much to read into that. And then lastly, on my list, S118, which, making building energy performance more visible when you're selling a home. The way I read it, it seemed like the seller was just required to provide sort of general reference materials and not, here's the energy audit of my house that you're buying or something like that. Is that right?
Yes, small
Okay.
steps.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Great, and then, what did I miss? Especially in the House.
So there are a couple other bills in the House that I had introduced one about exempting the purchase and use tax on electric vehicles up to, it's being reintroduced, I'm reintroducing it, and it's going to be up to $30,000 of purchase value, so you're not subsidizing Teslas. And it may be, the first 100, something like that. So that didn't go anywhere in my committee
Okay.
at all.
Was that a companion to S271 at all, or was it, because that was also up to
I don't know if it was a
30,000?
companion, I don't remember. And I
Okay.
don't remember the number. And then there was a bill that's being introduced by Mary Sullivan, and I've signed onto it, but to oppose all new fossil fuel infrastructure. And I think that I think she introduced it last year. And then, of course, the cap and trade
What
Okay.
does that
study committee.
I was wondering that myself, Jen.
What does opposing all new fossil fuel
Well, like,
infrastructure?
gas pipeline and things like that.
Oh, but not
But not
roads
road.
or?
No, no.
I mean,
Oh, yeah,
Okay,
well,
also,
right,
I mean,
yeah.
the
We're not gonna build-
definition is, right, is
Yeah,
critical.
it's, I guess, infrastructure to expand any kind of,
distribution of
Dis-
fossil
yeah,
fuels?
right.
Oh,
yeah,
And in fuel form, not necessarily electric
yeah.
lines, which would also be fossil fuel infrastructure in
Right.
some ways, right?
Yeah.
No?
I don't know, I don't know
I
what
don't
it
know,
means.
I just know that, I was sent an email saying, will you support this bill?
Hmm.
And there was actually a bunch of advocates working on getting legislators to sign on to taking a pledge to not support any new fossil fuel infrastructure. That's how I believe it was worded.
Okay.
So I don't have details,
Okay.
but
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else, before I
I think that's
turn it
all.
back
I can't
over?
remember. I'm sure there were other bills, but.
I have a question that maybe someone in the audience or on the committee might know. On the act relating to a study on whether to require large buildings to install solar generation, I'm wondering if anyone has a sense of how many large buildings we build in a year in Vermont that would fall under that law.
I don't know off the top
I know
of my
that
head.
down here in Wyndham County, I might have a skewed vision of how many buildings that is compared to, say, if I was in Essex, but.
It might be fewer now than it was for a period of time, and unfortunately, most of the box stores and big buildings that were built don't have the appropriate infrastructure to hold.
They're not strong enough, is that the?
No, they're not
Oh.
strong enough
Okay.
to hold all the panels on top of them.
Home Depot?
So, yeah, I think that we could give some kind of an incentive to if people are gonna build large or flat roof buildings, and also parking lots. We could give incentives for putting solar panels on parking lots, but as canopies. But
But we're not building very many of those a year in Vermont right now.
I would think we're building less than we were for a period of time, but I don't know that for sure.
Tom, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Oh,
Thank you.
very much, and thank you to the legislators for participating. The next section of our time this evening is to just basically give you each a chance to talk to us a little bit about energy. Any order, maybe start at the end, start at the far end. And a couple of questions if you could address, just sort of, what do you see coming up? What would you like to do? Or what would your focus be regarding energy for the coming session?
Thank you.
We'll start with that, and maybe 5 minutes apiece.
Thanks.
And if you need more, well, that's fine too.
So when I introduced myself as Representative-elect Emily Kornheiser. That means that I am newly elected and not going to be in the legislature until January. And so I don't have as much access to past bills or necessarily to the conversations that might happen in Senate or House leadership about what bills are coming up, which ones are going to come off walls. A lot of that happens behind the scenes, and I won't be part of those conversations until the session starts necessarily. What I do know that I want to bring to Montpelier is, one, to think about how these different pieces intersect. So when we look at the report from the Energy Action Network and the report from the governor's, was it a commission?
Climate Commission.
The Governor's Climate Commission, and we think about the recommendations around weatherization. I want to make sure that when we're having those conversations in committee or in the House, on the House floor, that we're thinking about both how that intersects with building science and our opportunities for a more robust green economy, but that we're also thinking about how that intersects with folks who are living in poverty and at middle incomes, so that we're not just reducing carbon, but we're also reducing asthma rates, we're reducing lead paint poisoning, we're reducing people's living costs, and we're making whole communities more livable, so that we don't all have to be coming from this from one perspective, that we can advance a green economy and we can change the path of our climate by thinking about whole communities and how these different issues intersect. We already are going into people's homes regularly around issues of weatherization, and we already have a housing crisis. So that needs to be rehabilitated. So as we're doing that, I want to make sure we're doing that with a mind towards building sciences and not just doing the bare minimum in each of these activities. It's also important to me when we look at whether we're electrifying our transportation system or for public transportation, or if we're doing it for individual transportation, that we're looking beyond market solutions. I do think that one policy tool that we have is rebates, but we need to think more broadly because rebates really only get to a very small portion of our population. And I think a lot of the changes that we've seen thus far on energy efficiency and how we've really seen a plateau in the amount of impact we've been able to have from energy efficiency is because a lot of those gains are from natural replacement costs and natural replacement of our appliances with a little bit of incentives added. So someone might sort of buy up slightly, but it's not as if we're all going out and replacing, you know, every product in our kitchen. I still have a 30-year-old refrigerator in my kitchen that, yes, I would like to replace it for the electricity cost. I would also like to replace it because it's so loud that you can't have a conversation in the kitchen anymore. But I think most of us are, you know, making decisions on a day-to-day basis. So when we want to find solutions, I think we have to look beyond market solutions if we want to make the kind of changes by 2050 that we want to see. I think the second real asset that we have to build on in our communities is this deep Vermont emphasis on local communities, that we do have an opportunity here to decentralize our grid. And I think in a way that perhaps other parts of the country don't have access to. We still have village centers that people identify with. We have an electric grid that's fairly recent. Some people, you know, still remember it being put in place. You know, I don't think we finished until the late 70s. So and we don't have internet or cell phone access in huge swaths of our communities, including here in Brattleboro on my own street. So if we think about rethinking our grid, and we're thinking about microgrids, community grids, and we're doing that by pairing it with ideas around community internet, community fiber access, and we're having that whole conversation holistically, focused on our community economies, building on the great work of our regional planning commissions, on our town energy committees, then I think we have a real opportunity to both grow our economy and grow our communities and do something about climate change simultaneously. And I think any solution that we see going forward is going to have to always pair those three things, whether that's big picture around efficiency or weatherization, or on the more local scale with our communities.
Thank you, Evelyn.
You're welcome.
So again, a question, do you want us each to take questions after we finish, or do you want us to just go down the line?
Probably go down the line.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because she said a lot of really good things.
She did.
I did.
And I didn't want it to get lost. Yeah.
Thanks, Becca.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm also allowed to be quite pie in the sky because I have not had any of my bills not come off the wall because they, you know, cost $5 yet. We can talk about this again next year too.
So I'm Becca Ballot, and I live here in Brattleboro in a house much like many of you live in. It's 1907. We have done as much insulating as we can do without having to rip out all the insides of all the walls because of the kind of formaldehyde insulation that's inside. We've replaced all the windows. We've tried to make it as tight. We've replaced all the doors, and it's still an absolute energy sip, okay? And that is not unique, right? We have an entire town of buildings like that. And so I've been thinking a lot about this issue of housing. And as I said earlier, I'm really hoping to be on the Energy Committee. I've been serving on the Economic Development and Housing Committee for the last 4 years. We talk about housing a lot, and as you know, where we expend most of our energy is in transportation and in the energy to heat our homes. And because of the old housing stock, we are essentially throwing money out the window, through our walls, around our doors, and simultaneously we're polluting the environment. And so there are many little tweaks that we have tried to initiate over the last few years to try to tighten up the homes that we do have. And so I've been really focusing the last couple months on this issue of building codes and energy codes and why we're not enforcing the codes. We don't have enough people on the ground to actually enforce the building codes. And so you can have a mechanism in place to tighten things up, but if you don't have anyone on the ground actually doing the enforcing, it's only good as the paper it's written on. So Emily and I and who else was in the room the other day? Emily Long. We met with representatives from SEON, the Sustainable Energy Outreach Network, talking about what is it that we can do around the issue of enforcement of building codes, but also a big issue that has come up before and always seems to die on the floor, which is contractor licensing. And when you're having renovations done, when you're having a home built, why is it that we do not require the builders to be licensed? Now, I understand all the reasons why it is, because I hear them all on the floor, and we always joke that everyone and their brother is a contractor in Vermont. But if we want to get serious about tightening up these old buildings around Vermont, then we need to really have some teeth in what we're doing around building and energy codes and about compliance. So I'm going to leave it at that. That's really where my focus is right now, and I am welcoming any input around language, around initiatives around housing, but energy in general. And whether I'm on that committee or not can certainly bring language to the committee. But it is really an area where I need to get more up to speed about all the possibilities for improving our system so that we even come close to our goals. Because as we said at the beginning, Ralph, we're not getting close, right? So let's be honest that we have these wonderful goals and we're not anywhere near achieving them. And so what are those actual hard conversations that we need to have in the legislature to actually make some real change? So.
Thank you, Becca. Molly?
Well, I have been on the Transportation Committee for all 10 years that I've been in the legislature, and I requested that committee because I was very concerned about climate change and the contribution that transportation in Vermont makes to carbon emissions. 43 to 47% of Vermont's greenhouse gases come from that sector. That said, it's been very, very difficult to make any kind of a dent at all. And in fact, we see, not just with transportation, but that Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions have gone up like 16%. And all the while, with all these programs that we have, and we need to think about, I believe we need to think about something that is going to, how can we actually slash greenhouse gas emissions fast? We need to do it fast. And you're not going to say to somebody, okay, if you're A to M in the alphabet, you have to carpool on these days and other people the other days. I mean, we need drastic kinds of things that there's not really a lot of appetite for. And I believe we have a very active climate caucus, very active, and a lot of new members. We had a meeting on the day that we had the fiscal briefing, and a lot of new members came, which was a great sign. There's a lot of energy to do something. And we have some really good activists who are working in concert, several different groups. Energy Independent Vermont is sort of a consortium of energy groups. And they have been the ones who've been pushing for the study of carbon pricing and how can we begin to actually put some price on what is creating great harm. So there's a lot of federal funding that comes with strings, for certain federal funding for transportation. You can't just say, oh, we're just not going to do any road work, we're going to put it all over the public transit. There are been some things in the state, and VTrans have been very cognizant of it, but we're sort of trapped. And I think that this Volkswagen settlement that gave us quite a bit of money, and I'm completely blanking out on the amount of money, but that 15% of the Volkswagen settlement, the big pot of money has to go to electric vehicle charging stations. So there's a lot of, and the governor and that realm is very, very on board with that. We need to get electrified. But I think that putting a price on carbon would be a very, very major change. And then I know that if they're looking at cap and trade, if we join with Quebec and Ontario and California, that it's been very beneficial to those economies too, the cap and trade. You know, then, I mean, that might be a little more palatable to people than, you know, something like the Essex plan. We don't know, but I'm hoping that my committee will be a more activist committee in this realm in terms of cutting transportation emissions too. I introduced a bill in 2013 to, you know, make it illegal to idle, vehicle idling for more than 5 minutes, but, you know, it's just like, I walk around town and I see people idling their cars and nobody's in them and they're in having coffee. And, you know, I mean, not that that's gonna change anything, but it's the mentality of how do we, you know, think differently about this. So, and, you know, I know that there are a lot of other issues related to solar panels and things like that, but that's just been pretty much my focus, has been on transportation, so.
Thank you, Molly.
So this is an area that is, I've never been on the Natural Resources Committee. You can ask me questions about lots of things and I can talk all day, but on this one, not so much. So I'm just gonna say that what I think we need to do is we really need to look a little more creatively at everything we do. I mean, transportation, we need to be a little more creative, and I don't know what that means. I leave that to the people who are involved in transportation to come up with good ideas and say, these are good ideas. I leave it to you guys to come up with good ideas. What are the, I just was listening to a thing on New Hampshire Public Radio today, and they were talking about how they had 100 ideas for energy conservation and the carbon problem. It isn't an area that I'm really familiar with. I think we need to do more building efficiencies. That is really important. I too live in one of those old houses, and what I would love to do with my old house, I can't, there's no way I can afford it to do it. So we need to be more creative about how we approach that. But I also think that we need to not ignore agriculture in this, because, and I learned a lot over the last few weeks about the carbon in the air we don't like, but carbon in the soil we really need. And we're sucking all the carbon out of the soil and putting it into the air. So we need to have regenerative agricultural processes. And if we don't do that, we are going to create more carbon in the atmosphere, which is bad, and less in the soil, which is also bad. And I had no idea. I didn't understand that at all. Now I understand it this much. And so there's a lot around agriculture that we need to look at that can aid us in this. If we only look at housing and transportation and electric generation, I think we're missing the boat. So agriculture is very important. We need to figure out how we can use methane digesters on smaller farms. It's very expensive to do it, but you can't transport the manure because it's so heavy. So you can't transport it to we looked at creating kind of community anaerobic digesters. The road crew, the transportation people would not be very happy. But so there are a lot of things like that we need to look at. And then I believe we need to each take a little more responsibility in what we individually do. We do not need to have strawberries in December, and we don't need to have...
They don't taste good anyway.
I know they don't, and we don't need to have asparagus in February. So we need to take some responsibility, because all of those individual actions are adding to the issues that we're confronting. They're adding to the use of more fossil fuels because of transporting the food. They're impacting the places where the food is produced in a negative way, maybe in a positive way if we pay enough for it, but and it's impacting the air. And we don't count that into the cost of it. You can buy asparagus for $1.99 a pound, and it probably really should be about $17 a pound if it's not local. So anyway, this isn't an area that I'm very well versed on, so I look to my colleagues in the Senate and in the House to help me understand when bills come forward and what they mean and the impact that they'll have. That's how I have to do it.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Could I add one more thing? Just to
Certainly.
follow up on what Emily said earlier, and I just want to make it more explicit. It's the issue around our lack of connectivity around the state and infrastructure around the web and broadband and how that relates to our carbon footprint. And so I know, so my district is all of Windham County, and I know that there are many people who have to drive into town to get to a hotspot. They would rather be able to work from home. They could do a lot of their business from their homes up in Marlborough, in Reedsboro, in many parts of the Newfane, West Brattleboro, and they get in their car and drive so they can get to a place where they can actually use their computers. And it is, we have to finally wrestle with it. I was talking with Laura Sibilia, representative, this morning, and one of the things she was saying is if she gets nothing else done over the next 2 years, like, she is going to get a plan through her committee to connect the state. So I just want to make that more explicit. So
Thank you, Becca. Before we add to more questions, I heard two very strong themes. One that's of a holistic approach, and also two, let's call it the stomach to do it. We need a holistic approach. I was hearing from you, and the transportation issues, the housing issue, all of these issues, the code enforcement.
yeah.
Thank you both, all of you rather. Those two themes seem very strong to me. I want to thank you for bringing them up, regardless of your knowledge of energy issues. Thank you.
And it's
So-
great that you talked about agriculture. I mean, and I think each of us, sort of exemplifies that there's so many different areas to work on towards that same goal.
So-
Agriculture.
Emily, you
Eating.
I want to push back a little bit on what you said, Jeanette. So I'm a good Brattleboro liberal. I don't buy out-of-season fruit. I buy organic and local. My son thinks that a mango in January is better than any gift he could ever get because he only gets about one a year. But I think if we're really talking about bold solutions, as you were, Molly, and I think, as everyone said, we need to move beyond individual market-based solutions, right?
Oh.
And I know you agree with this.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply
Yeah.
that individual solutions
Yeah.
will be the answer,
Yeah.
but I think that just was made very aware of some of this when and I don't even remember the name of the author, the book that came out with the 180 solutions, and then to the issues, and a lot of those were individual solutions. Of course, the big ones that are going to have a huge impact are not individual solutions, but we also each need to take some responsibility. I drive a ton.
We all do. It's Vermont.
And I don't want to drive a ton, but I also don't want to work at home.
And and so what I'm wondering is, what are those bold solutions? What is the bold solution to transportation? I think it goes beyond each of us having a hybrid that we're driving by ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm asking all of you, what is the
Yeah.
bold solution? Because I haven't
Have
heard
an
any of us
answer.
come out with it today.
Please identify yourself.
I'm George Harvey. I'm on the Energy Committee. I think a lot of people know me because of my blog, geoharvey.com. I write for Green Energy Times. I write for Clean Technica. I have a TV show with Tom over here, who's operating the camera, Tom Fennell. Transportation. I'd say two things. First of all, We have an opportunity, and I haven't heard anybody say anything about it. The federal government, as you know, is trying to roll back emission standards. It happens that California is operating with a different set of standards because it has, by law, a right to do that. But a lot of people don't realize that so does every other state in the United States. They can choose to follow California's standards, and 13 of them do. Okay? Colorado is next up. The governor of Colorado is saying that's what I'm going to do. Another thing that I think you probably are aware of, because it has been in the news in the last month, David Blittersdorf is running, is starting to run passenger service on trains, and he believes that he's going to have passenger service running within 6 or 8 months, and his service is going to be up in the area of Burlington and Montpelier and Rutland for the time being, but he does intend to come down to Brattleboro and also down to Bennington at some point in the future if the thing up there runs. And he is interested in tying that service in with bus service. So in addition to having trains coming down from Burlington to Brattleboro, there would be a bus from Brattleboro to Bennington. And it would be scheduled so that a person coming down by train could then get out into the countryside. So that's part of it. And when you combine that with the business of the opportunity to go to lower emission cars, and of course, obviously, electric cars, we've got a lot of things we can do, I think.
Thank you, George. At this point, perhaps we could see if there's anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question or raise an issue. Please come up to the microphone and identify yourself.
Michael Bosworth, Brattleboro resident. Just a few thoughts, just a couple of remarks on Ralph's early remarks. The graph that shows the decline in number of solar, permitted solar net metering capacity, I think that's, shows a lot. I think it could even show more. I'm not sure if there's a corresponding decline in number of jobs in the solar industry or not, but that would make the arguments even stronger, appealing to more people. And one of your thoughts, Ralph, is forget carbon taxes or fees, politically impossible. I'm not sure they're politically impossible, especially with the new number of the sort of the supermajority we now that is now in the legislature, and depending on what the proposals coming out of the study for January 15th might show. So I have more hope there. So addressing the housing that both Emily and Becca brought up, I think there's some good ideas there. I think Green Mountain Power has been trying some things out, so I'm not sure how much you intend to interface with them. A few years ago, they in Rutland they built they took on 10 existing homes, I think it was, and really tightened them up, made them a lot more comfortable, healthier, and learned some things from that. Now, and I don't know where they are with there's a newer project to take on a whole town, a small town, the town of Ponton. And so that would assume they mean taking on all the homes in Ponton. I'm not sure how analogous those homes are to ours in Brattleboro, but
What town is it?
Ponton, P-O-N-T-O-n.
Where is that?
Panton? No,
Near
Ponton, yeah.
Ferrisburg,
Yeah,
Jens.
it's near
There's
south
near
of
Virginia.
Lake Champlain, sort of.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're taking on that whole town.
I think it's in Addison County, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know where they are with that, but the idea of taking on the whole town means taking on all the housing in the town.
Right.
So this is a suggestion to look at that. One final one. Sometimes a lot of these ideas don't go any further because there's new money proposed. We can't take it on because there's new money. But sometimes a little bit of new money can help a lot. I think about the $2 million for working lands, that went quite far, and then there was additional money every year. Also, there's the new bill with $10,000 to try and attract people to come to Vermont. So last week, in front of the select board, Tom Franks introduced this idea of a sustainability coordinator for Brattleboro. And a number of other towns could benefit from the same idea, a person to work not just with the municipality, but with for-profits, nonprofits, residences throughout the town to make a lot more progress. That might not go anywhere without money. So is there some way to create a pot of money, seed money, that would help get an idea like that off the ground? So.
Thank you.
So can I just make one comment on this graph? I don't know if this is true or not, but when I've just been looking at it, and I've been trying to think about it, that one of the things that I think we did when we first started putting in solar installations is we started grabbing up agricultural land. And we were, I think, doing it a little bit irresponsibly in some places. And I don't know if that has any impact on this, but if we stepped back and said, we shouldn't be putting solar panel fields on agricultural land, because we need that agricultural land and we need to regenerate it. So I think we need to be more creative about where we put solar panels and how we use them. And I don't know that that has any impact here, but I know that there was a huge, it became a huge issue for a lot of people about gobbling up ag lands.
Just care to offer a response, Ralph?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond because.
Just have the mic, please.
Sorry, I wanted to respond because both to Michael and to Jeanette, because this graph was referred to. And I'll just cut to the chase, but then get back to addressing that specific issue, which is that a few years ago, the governor was very happy to report to the world that Vermont was now #1 in clean energy related jobs, and that the total number of jobs related to clean energy work was estimated at 17 or 18,000 positions around the state. New jobs created because of the boom in renewable energy in particular, but clean energy work in general in the state. The net metering in solar alone, when it reached its peak, was moving along at a clip of somewhere, I think I'm remembering correctly, between $150 and $200 million of new investment per year. And the thing too is that that net metering is not just solar. You can have hydropower net metering, you can have wind net metering, and so forth. Solar got a lot of attention because it was where the most intense activity occurred, but it was broader than that. And a lot of those jobs, I think that there's been a lag, but I think a certain number of those jobs have just disappeared because the work's disappeared. And so now, we don't have the jobs, we don't have the investment. And at the same time, there's been all this talk in the last year or two about the Essex Plan and about carbon taxation or carbon fees, carbon charges. Which is basically an attempt to intervene in the entire market for everything that has anything associated with energy, which is everything, and tip the balance of the market to create a disincentive for wasting energy. And I'd like to throw an idea out there, and I've got to say that this is not an idea that I've checked in with my Green Lantern colleagues about. I haven't checked in with the other members of the REV Legislative Affairs Committee, which interacts through REV with the legislature. And
We're on tenterhooks. You have to tell us what your plan is.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I think that if you want to generate the funds necessary to begin to really move the needle on these crucial and stagnated areas, like weatherization in particular, but other things that also need money, an expansion of the net metering program to simply raise the level of activity back to what it was a couple of years ago is fully feasible. Almost all the legislation needed is already in place. The rules are in place. They've been implemented. And on top of that, and I think this is really important to emphasize, what we have now in the state among engineers and surveyors and lawyers and environmental scientists and developers and all the people on the utility side and all the people within the government departments there's already a brain trust in place who knows how to run this program. And sure, there were certain excesses because it was a brand new program. Maybe prime agricultural soils saw too much solar development. Prime ag land, scenic view sheds saw too much solar development. But there are a lot of brownfields and old mines and old quarries and old tailings dumps and so forth that don't have solar on them, that nobody can see. But they're not being developed because just a lot of the money and the impetus has leached out of the industry because of the regulatory changes. So I would like to say, let's use net metering to really generate some huge economic leverage, because it's right there and it's already in place. It can be tampered with.
Thank you, Ralph.
Yeah, okay.
We have a comment from the audience. Would you please come up and identify yourself?
Yes. I'm Katrina. I'm from Integrated Solar.
Hi, Katrina.
Thanks. And I wanted to talk about Ralph's presentation way back then, but I didn't get a chance. But he just brought it back up, so I want to jump in on that. And it was about the net metering. So with this graph, what I see in this graph is a few things. It was when the net metering laws changed. So specifically, let's see if I can do this right. You can no longer build 500 kW systems on the ground, and if you do, the owner of that system has to take 50% of it. There's a percent, and all those laws weren't there before. So you could do community solar as long as you're in the same utility territory, Green Mountain Power, for example, or Jacksonville Electric. So that decreased solar, because you couldn't no longer get someone with the money to make an investment and then do all this community solar. Okay, that's one example. The other one is, this is 2016 was when Trump came on board and did solar tax tariffs on panels and steel. And even though they weren't even in place yet, everyone got afraid. Solar just stopped happening as soon as he was in office. And it's been prices have come down, but people are still afraid. Even though the 30% federal tax credit is still there, people are like, well, he might just take it away tomorrow. So there's an amount of fear out there that you kind of have to get through. Let me see if I can find the other one. So then there's just other issues that I have that I don't have anything to back it up with. But for transportation, for example, there was Vermont 350. Done something with Rebecca Jones. She had this brilliant idea once about carpooling to certain places, and then people doing public transportation in town, and in town only being walking and biking, like off the wall things like that. And then with food, I think I agree with both of you. It's definitely corporate level, global level issue, but we all vote with our dollars. So every individual, everything you do in life, you're voting. If you buy the cheaper, less expensive shoes, then you're voting for child labor in China.
I think a lot of us can't afford to vote with our dollars.
But
I don't want them to be left out of the democracy that we're talking about.
You do. Everyone needs to know every time they spend $1, they're voting. That's what you're voting for. Every time you decide to get in your car instead of walk, that's what you're voting for. You're making a decision for the world, not just for yourself. So it is. We all make a difference. I think I got it. Thank you.
The gentleman in the back.
Rick Foley, excuse me, Rick Foley, blew up the hill, house built in 1920. So I kind of understand the deal about energy efficiency.
That's pretty new.
That's right. I don't know. It was a kit house, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Sears and Roebuck, railroad car. But here's the deal. I could speak to any one of the points you brought up here today, but I'm really feeling the irony of the situation. It's about regulations, legislation regulations. And I'm thinking about the Public Utility Commission, and I'm thinking about public utilities. Right? Regulated public utilities. Well, I'm thinking about the FCC. the commons of the airways, the EMF. And Brattleboro Community Television is going to be legislated, regulated, out of existence. That's what's happening with net metering. Think about it. A utility is simply accessing the commons. River, right? Wind, solar, and the right-of-ways to distribute that energy. So Green Mountain Power basically is doing the same thing that the media corporations are doing, lobbying legislators, Public Utility Commission, to kill net metering because they're in competition with net metering. So I would suggest that all of you purchase a book called Small is Beautiful, put out by the Rocky Mountain Institute. 217 reasons why distributed generation is profitable, and talking about economic justice, environmental protection, and I bought 10 copies back in the day at $60 a piece. I don't know if they're available. I owe Ralph a copy. I still have an extra copy for Ralph. But for me, this is a sad state of affairs. Because we had a chance to buy the hydroelectric dams on the Connecticut and Deerfield rivers. That was blown. I'm a member of SEON, member of SevEds, the business of energy efficient housing and financing. It can be done, but there are too many things in the way. So I'm just thinking that, I hope Tom will be here next year filming, that we'll have a studio here. I don't know if that's going to hold up. So I'm just saying to myself, this is tough sledding. And the business of being an activist, which I think I've been for many, many years, takes far more patience than I have.
Thank you, Mr.
Do we have a chance to respond to some of what's been said before we
Yeah,
go to more?
I think it would be appropriate if you would like to respond.
should
to
we?
that. No, I think we're running near to our end of our time, so please respond if you'd like to.
One, I want to thank you. And I actually somehow own that book already. I'm not sure how it got in my house, but it is there on the shelf, and I have looked at it. I think it's really important that we do spend a minute appreciating one of the big assets that we do have in Vermont, which is a publicly regulated electrical grid, which is fairly rare these days to have the level of regulatory capacity we have, and it is one of the assets we have to build on, as you said, Ralph. So I want us to remember that as we think about bold solutions, and I just want to make sure that we call some attention to that.
Thank you, Emily.
No, I just saw that George wanted to jump in here.
I was hoping that people who haven't spoken already might have something to say. We're near the end of our time.
Tad Montgomery, for those who don't know, I am now the City of Lebanon's Energy and Facilities Manager.
Congratulations.
And have been for almost 12 months. And we are moving that city rapidly towards 100% renewable electricity, and from there. You'll be hearing more about that soon. But I want to talk about a very different topic, and that is the forces that have been brought to bear to stop renewable energy. And we see those very clearly, those of us who pay attention at the national level. But they're also very deeply entangled in what's going on in Vermont and are very effective. And they raise issues like solar not being attractive, and solar ruining farmland, and wind power destroying ridgelines. And I would just like you all to think in a very concerted way with us about how to counter those voices effectively.
Thank you, Ted. We have 2 minutes left in our scheduled time. We did start late, and I would check to see if the people here would like to run a little bit late, or if we should end on time. So,
I can stay an extra 10 or 15 minutes, but that's about all.
10 minutes would be.
So we'll run an extra 10 minutes and give George a chance to say something.
I've got a couple of observations, and I'm going to state them as concisely as I possibly can. There are, in some cases, things that nobody has mentioned. One of them is that the International Energy Agency, which is a part of the UN, has projected that we will run into an energy shortfall from fossil fuels, specifically from oil and gas, by, they said, 2020, which gives us, as I read what they're saying, about 13 months. And that shortfall will continue to get worse for at least 5 years. This is not going to be something that we get over quickly. And that in 2025, we're going to have approximately 60% of the demand for oil and gas met worldwide. The reason why they say this is happening is because oil and gas discoveries have dropped to a level that is the lowest on their chart, and the chart goes back to 1950. So it's the lowest level since 1950, and I would suspect that it might have been the lowest level since the 1930s, because you're going back almost to the Second World War there. So they are expecting that we're going to run into trouble. That's the first thing that I would mention. Another, switching to an entirely different topic, because we were talking about housing, I think that it might be worthwhile to think about having some kind of legislation that says that new houses that are built have to be to a code that makes them energy neutral. Because the cost of new housing that is energy neutral has dropped to the point where it's approximately equal to the cost of new housing that is not energy neutral. It's about the same as conventional housing. And when you walk up to somebody who just built a house and say, you know, you could have had a house that wouldn't cost you anything for fuel during the entire winter here in Vermont, if they haven't chosen to do that, they're going to be extremely upset. I know that because I actually had it happen once. That is a second thing. I mentioned the thing about, another thing that I want to mention is farmland and solar panels. I don't think I could argue about view, but when it comes to farmland and solar panels, very regularly I find new articles coming up in the news, and I look at a lot, but new articles come up in the news about agricultural products being raised under solar panels, and they include grazing sheep, raising bees, raising hay, believe it or not, using conventional equipment. They drive trucks under solar panels that have been put up at a higher level, and this increases the income for the farmer by about 60% on an acreage basis.
Wrap up.
I'm done.
You're going to have the last 10 minutes be the George show.
That's quite all right. I've got
one more
one show.
thing. Sorry, Katrina again. I forgot to mention I received a phone call from Catamount Solar last week. They're up north, who told me that Green Mountain Power is not letting them put solar on the lines anymore. It said that they're full, and that even systems below 15 kW. I question that. And the other piece with Green Mountain Power I want to just mention, you thinking that it's public run through the PUC, something like that. Regulated. My feeling, my experience is that they're very much like this. I don't consider it publicly watched at all.
Unless there's somebody who hasn't spoken who would like to offer a thought or a comment, I'd like to give the last few minutes to the legislators a chance to sort of summarize, say what they care to say before we close tonight.
I'll
Who would like to
start because I don't have much to say.
Oh, good.
What I have to say is that there have been some ideas generated here tonight. Don't count on us to remember all those ideas. You have to bring them to us. We're happy to introduce pieces of legislation, but don't rely on our 150 little, or in this case, 5 little minds. Bring us
There's 4 of us.
But Tristan is also representing Brattleboro, so I counted him in. There are five of us to represent you and bring us those ideas, get them to us. We can introduce pieces of legislation. We can ask committee chairs to take testimony on them. So that's all I have to say is bring those ideas forward.
Thank you, Sue.
Don't count on my little mind.
Yes, ditto. And I just want to say also
Don't count
that.
on my little mind.
Oh, no, I meant ditto about the legislation. I don't know if anybody knows, but the Vermont Council on Rural Development has been doing a really great job. I think some of you have been to their conferences, and they now have this Vermont Climate Economy Initiative that they will go to a community and work on that. And I know that John Copans, who grew up in Brattleboro, works for them, and he had been talking with Stephanie Bonin about bringing that to Brattleboro. I just emailed her to see and said there didn't seem to be a lot of energy. You know, it requires a certain investment, but maybe this group, you know, might want to think about exploring what that might mean. So it's the Vermont Council on Rural Development, and it's John Copans, Joncopans, and I know he was talking from way back last spring with Stephanie, and she was excited, and they were all, I don't know if they've chosen, I think they choose one or two communities every year. They have 2 programs. One is a Climate Economy Initiative, and the other is more of a community building, which they have done in Guilford and Vernon very successfully. They're very, very reputable, great organizations. So that might be something that could happen in Brattleboro with, you know, maybe with under the, I don't know, with the Energy Committee. And it seems like, you know, we're ready to hire an energy coordinator, right? Tad, you could be the whatever, shepherd that, you know, that idea through, you know. I mean, it sounds like you're doing great things there in Lebanon, and as an example of what could happen in Brattleboro. You know, you think about really the work that Paul Cameron started here a long time ago now, and here we still are.
Thank you, Molly. Becca?
So I just want to start by saying, for the record, I believe my mind is of adequate size, so
Well, yes.
be clear. One thing that was not mentioned, which I'm very excited about, is that there's going to be some changes happening on the Senate side on our Transportation Committee. It has not been a committee that's really been focused on policy. It's really been one that's been focused on just making the numbers add up on the spreadsheet, and there's going to be a lot of new faces there, and there's an opportunity there to really make some progress on initiatives related to transportation. So I don't know exactly what form it will take, but I know the Pro Tem is committed to that being a committee that is really addressing policy concerns.
And maybe we'll have a more functional natural resources committee.
That is the hope.
And I think that might be happening on the House side too, in the Transportation Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you for today. Someone started the evening talking about different policy tools, and I wanted to circle back to that in closing. We've looked at market solutions quite a bit, and I think we have more opportunities for that. That's one policy tool. We've looked at taxation quite a bit, and I think that's a lot of where the Essex plan sits and a few other plans sit. And there's opportunity there for policy leverage, but there's also a lot of very complex implications for different levels of our economy and different opportunities in our economy. And then there's regulation, which is something that has fallen much out of favor in the last 20 years in America. But as I was saying, Vermont does still have an opportunity for leverage in that we might not always be leveraging. And so I'm hoping to really look to that more as a way of making some of these shifts that we need to make that perhaps we haven't to the extent that we could have. When we look back to 2016, it wasn't just our presidential landscape that changed, it was also our governor that changed here. So when we look at the changes in numbers on this graph that we've talked about, there was also a different emphasis in our executive branch on what was counted and how much attention we paid to what's counted. And while we all, I think, like to believe that numbers are truth, I think different people and different administrations work harder to collect certain numbers than others. And I don't mean to sound extremely cynical there, but I think it's possible that some of the numbers might still be available, floating, that we could gather to us if we wanted to. And I think there's still real opportunities for change there with the political will, which it seems that we have in our legislature this year, and I think we'll have in the future in our executive branch.
Thank you very much for attending and sharing your thoughts with us today. This will be broadcast on VCTV at some point. It's been recorded, and it's been a true pleasure to be here with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for